BS in Denver Sports.
Allie Monroy here with Jake Shapiro and Ryan Koenigsberg for BSN Denver after Colorado's very interesting win against UCLA. Guys, what are your thoughts overall about the game?
Really just another game where Colorado finds a way to win. It's never pretty, really, it seems, with this team. It's seemed to get uglier as the season has gone on, but good teams find ways to win games when they don't play well. And not only did the Buffs not play well, they played terribly. 12, Mike McIntyre was calling it 13. It was actually 12. 12 penalties, very uncharacteristic of this team. It felt like they got almost a little too cocky out there, got a couple taunting penalties, but in the end, they found a way to win, and they're 7-2, and that is the mark of a good program. And even though they're not happy with the win, you have to be happy with where they sit right now.
Jake, what about you?
Not only the penalties were mistakes, but they made 4 turnovers in the contest, all in the first half. 3 coming on Sefo Liufau. 1 came from backup quarterback Steven Montez, because Sefo had a slight injury there for a second. He called it a stinger. Nothing to be worried about. But Ryan, you know this from covering the Broncos. What the Buffs did tonight was they didn't make enough mistakes to lose the football game. You know, when you're the Broncos or you're the Buffs this year, you just got to trust your defense, and you got to have your offense and overall game just not make enough mistakes, and you're going to trust your team to win. And that's what happened tonight. But perhaps most shockingly is how terribly the Buffaloes played, and still want to ask Mike McIntyre about that post game. And it seemed like it was almost a shock that he was in that position, that his team could play probably the worst possible football game that they could play, and they still beat a team by 10 points that's a Pac-12 opponent.
Defense had a huge part in this game. What are a few moments that stood out to you from the defense?
It's that old saying of bend, don't break. You know, they got put in some really tough situations, and that's another mark of greatness. When you get put in a bad situation from the offense turning the ball over, you don't just lay down and give them 7 points. They stood up, they forced some field goal attempts, they blocked a field goal attempt, they forced 2 other misses. It's that bend, don't break mentality, and then the ability to bend and not give up anything at all. That's what gives that offense the confidence on the other side of the field to continue playing loose. You know, you turn the ball over 4 times, and all of a sudden you can start pressing as an offense, and you know that compounds those errors. With a defense out there that you can pretty much put in any position at all and still feel like they're going to have your backs, it continues to keep the team loose. And you know, you made the comparison to the Broncos. It's the same sort of thing where a defense is so good that the team never loses hope. They never have a doubt in their mind that those guys are going to go out there and make the plays. And across the board tonight, a lot of those guys were making big plays.
What, the Buffs have played 4 home games, I believe, on the year?
Yes.
They've allowed 3 touchdowns at home. That's incredible. Say what you will about the defense and the game UCLA had and how many penalties there were, but give all the credit in the world to this defense. As Ryan said, bend, don't break, but they're so clutch too. Every time they needed a 3rd down stop, they got it. Every time they needed a sack to get UCLA out of field position, they got it. Every time they needed an interception to end a drive, they got it. Tedrick Thompson, Cheeto Awuzie, these guys are monsters, and they were without one of their key pieces, Jimmy Gilbert, tonight, who left the game it was ejected from the game due to a targeting in the first minute, it seemed. And a guy like Addison Gillum, who's a veteran on this team, steps up, and there was almost no hole with Kenneth Olabode, Addison Gillum filling that linebacking position.
And don't forget to mention Christian Shaver, who has caught flack this season for being maybe a weaker link of that defense. He comes in place of Jimmy Gilbert, and he gets 2 sacks. So, you know, it's another cliche, next man up. Guys come in, they're comfortable with the guys behind them, and they're able to go ahead and do their job and do it well.
What are a few things you think the offense needs to work on this week and make sure that it doesn't happen next week against Arizona?
Well, I'll start with this, the play calling. The play calling at the start of the game was brutal, in my opinion. What Colorado does well when they're playing their best is they establish a run game early. They come out for the first possession of the game with 5 wide receivers, no one in the backfield, not even attempting a run, and that first drive stalls. And they had great field position, and they couldn't capitalize on it. It wasn't until the second half when they really got Phil Lindsay's legs chugging that the offense looked somewhat competent.
Yeah, I think they need to get Sefo back on track. And Jake, you're right with the play calling. I think that's maybe what they were trying to do there early in the game. They wanted to get Sefo kind of feeling it, kind of loose. But we talked all week about the way UCLA has defended the run, and it didn't seem like they committed enough to really pounding it down their throats. And I think it goes back to them wanting to get Sefo involved. Because, look, Sefo hasn't been good now for a couple weeks. But that being said, he, kind of like that defense, always gives his teammates confidence. You know, I talked to Steven Montez after the game, who basically said, when he went down, I thought he was out, and so I'm preparing myself to play, and all of a sudden he comes back, and I'm just like, there he goes again. You know, he's such an absolute warrior. And on a football field, there's nothing more valuable than knowing a guy like that who is more bruised up than you. He's hurting more than you, and he's out there fighting just as hard as you. It raises everyone up to another level, and so I think they need to get Sefo back on track to where he was, but he continues to instill confidence in his teammates.
Well, we just talked about Sefo, but what about his lows during the game? He had a few interceptions, and that was the first time this season that he's had a few interceptions. So what are your thoughts?
What I'll say is Colorado has a good chance to win anytime their defensive backs or wide receivers are put in one-on-one positions. Tonight was the first time their wide receivers couldn't exploit one-on-one matchups, and Sefo Liufau had trouble figuring out where to throw it and how to throw it. The offensive line, probably their worst game as well. They did not look good. Sefo was hit many times. So, yeah, you know what? You can blame Sefo Liufau for making some poor decisions, but I think you can also blame the guys around him.
I agree. I don't think Sefo had enough time in the pocket at all for a lot of these plays, and that's what caused him to panic and caused him to run and try and carry the ball. And he did execute well in some plays, but in others he just couldn't get it through.
Exactly, and I mean, it felt like there was a long stretch there where every time he hit his back foot, he was turning, spinning, trying to get away from rushers. And Mike McIntyre said it after the game. They knew coming in that UCLA could rush the passer, and they had a hard time defending it. But when you look back on it, they found a way. And in the end, that's really all that matters. Sefo, tough game, and then you get through it and you move on. And when you do that, it just compounds everything. You know, it's iron sharpens iron. It's all that. Everything comes together. You become stronger. You fix those mistakes. The team's coming in tomorrow. They don't come in normally the day after a win. They're coming in tomorrow to fix those mistakes. And you know, you have to have confidence, especially with this coaching staff and the way that this team is playing. They're going to do it.
It would seem just perfect that this team's goal is a Pac-12 championship game, and they had to suffer probably their toughest game at the start of November. They talked all year about winning these games in November, their gold games. Well, no conflict, no story. They certainly have some conflict to overcome to make sure they get a road win against Arizona next week.
Well, speaking of Arizona, what are a few key things the Buffs can't do next week that they did this week?
Penalties. They have to get rid of those penalties. You don't get away with that, especially on the road. You can kind of get away with it here. I joked with Mike McIntyre afterwards. You know, the Raiders committed 23 penalties last week, and they found a way to win. And he said, well, that's kind of their mantra. Colorado football can't afford for that to be their mantra, especially on the road against Arizona. It's another game where, like this one, you go into it with a lot of confidence that Colorado should win. They just have to get that mental block, whatever's going on in their mind right now, and get back to where they were, because they were really rolling. Now they've hit a lull. You get through the lull with 2 wins. You got to get rid of those mental errors, the mental mistakes. Don't be standing over guys after you make a big hit. You don't need to do that. You're here. You've arrived. Act like you've been there now.
You know, they're not clicking at the level they need to be, and this is the time of the year where you need to start clicking. And you know, you said it with the penalties. That's something that just can't happen. Mike McIntyre said flat out, we will not have that in our program, and that's not the recipe for this team's success. So Ryan said it, but really they got to fix their penalties.
To catch more of our post-game content, go to bsndenver.com. For Jake Shapiro, Ryan Koenigsberg, I'm Allie Monroy, BSN Buffs.